This happened in my junior year of high school when I was 17 years old. For context, this isn't the type of story to make you jump out of your seat type of story. It is, however, one of the creepiest and most awkward moments I've ever had. So anyway, this happened about 2 weeks ago, just when school was getting out. I was home and had just finished up my final project for school before the summer. Nothing else to do, and still having motivation to be productive, I thought I'd drive around the area to deliver some orders and make some extra cash. So I get in my car and drive around town, doing orders left and right for several people. They were pretty simple for the most part, the restaurants not being too far away. I'd say I did this for about 2 hours or so, before it started getting late. Most of the stores were closing, and I decided to head back home. However, I got one final notification from DoorDash, telling me that someone was requesting the delivery inside the area. I was annoyed, but it wasn't that far at the end of the day, so I bit my lip and accepted the delivery. After getting the food, I drive over to the location, pull up to a one-story, small home. Now, the area I was in wasn't the best, and it was kind of creepy to be honest, but I knew I had to get it done in order to go home. I get out of my car and put the food on his doorstep, as requested, then took a picture for proof. After leaving, I hear the door unlock from behind me and see someone step outside. Standing in front of the door is this tall, lanky man wearing this huge jacket. It made no sense as it was nearing summer, and if you live in Florida, you know how hot it gets. But it really wasn't any of my business, so I just told him to enjoy his food and went on my way. But as I'm walking over to my car, I hear him tell me to wait, that he had something for me. I turn around and he goes back inside his house and motions for me to come inside with him. Most of his house was partially dark, and you could kind of see inside, and the atmosphere itself looked very strange. I wasn't about to just enter a random person's house in the middle of the night, so I politely declined, telling him that I couldn't do that and I had to get home. He said that there wasn't anything to be worried about. It was just a surprise. Eventually it got to the point where he just brought whatever he was talking about to give me outside, which ended up being a box of cookies. He claimed that he took care of all his delivery drivers and wanted to treat us to something special since we work so hard. After handing me these cookies, he instantly started talking about how his grandma was a cook and owned this $1 million business, and she'd given him a recipe. I don't know if anything he was claiming was true, but needless to say, I really didn't care. I just thanked him for the cookies and went home, where I ended up just setting the cookies on my bed. I was tired, so I decided to take a shower and just get ready for bed. I'm in the shower for a good 10 minutes, and I hear my mom yelling something while calling my name. She didn't really sound mad or anything, just distressed and concerned. I turned off the water, wrapped up in a towel, and hurried into my room where I found my mom sitting on my bed. I instantly understood why she was so concerned. My cat had torn into the box of cookies, and I had eaten nearly half of them. She was on my bed breathing heavily, acting as if she was about to pass away at any moment. At that point, we knew that we had to get her to a vet. The only one that was still open was about 15 minutes away. We put her into the car and floored it down the road to the hospital. We got there, a veterinarian was thankfully kind enough to take her in and run a few tests on her. These tests basically checked for any signs of poisoning or sickness she may have had. After about 10 minutes, the nurse came back out with her happy and healthy again. It turned out there were several traces of brodifacoum in her system. Brodifacoum is a very dangerous and very fatal chemical that was mainly used for killing rodents. Those cookies that I'd received had been laced with it. Fortunately, the nurse was able to help her recover from it by pumping her stomach with medication. With all this being said, she told us that if we'd arrived even 10 minutes later, she probably wouldn't have made it. The police were called, and I gave them the address that I'd delivered that DoorDash meal to. However, when they got there, whoever gave me those cookies was long gone. There's an open investigation of the incident, but after about a week, they finally called it off, as there was little to no information from that man. I'm just glad our cat thankfully survived.
For a little backstory, this all took place when COVID-19 had shut everything down in March 2020. I was sent home from my college and I had to deal with Zoom classes, and I also went back to work at the burger joint that I would work at whenever I was home on breaks. I won't say the name of the place, but it was always very busy, and during COVID it made us even busier due to us being a fast food place, so we never had to close down, but other places in the plaza did. We always had some really crazy and nasty people, but the pandemic just made everyone so much worse. At the time, we had this one regular that would come in who we thought had some mental problems multiple times a week. He would be really emotionless in his talking and just gave really blank dead stares towards everyone, and just stood there like a gargoyle, really intimidating and statuesque. He would ride his bike up to the walk-up area and look through the sliding windows until one of us got to taking his order. But he only really liked certain people to take his order and was also very cold towards us. He would order the same thing every time, but wants it fresh right out of the grease and handled by once again only certain people. And to make sure of it, he'll intensely stare at us through the pickup window. He would make the other customers outside so uncomfortable that they would walk away or they would just sit in their cars until he left. He used to only come in during the day shifts, but because days were much busier than the night shifts, and with all his demands that he would give us every time, my manager got fed up and told him to no longer come here during the day, thus now making him a night shift problem. During the week, I would work night shifts because of class, and I would usually be clocking out by 10 p.m. It was around 9:30 and I was closing my side down and starting to clean when he then rolled up on his bike. I happened to be one of the few people he let take his order, so as usual I took his order. He wants everything completely fresh, the standard list of demands. But one demand he gave was new. He always orders a side of fries with his meal, and sometimes to put the fries in the carton we either use a scooper or tongs. He asked us to use the scooper instead of the tongs because it'll give him more fries. Me just wanting him to leave and being close to leaving myself, I just went over and told the fry guy what he wanted. The fry guy just rolled his eyes, knowing how annoying this guy is, and dropped some new fries in the grease for him. The fry guy went on a break shortly after, and the night manager took over a station and waited for the fries to be ready. She didn't know it was this guy though, and she used the tongs to put the fries in the carton. She then hands me the order to pass out. The guy slides open the window, and he told me that she didn't do what he asked and that he wants more fries in his bag, since it looked like she didn't put enough in, which she put plenty in. He just didn't get his way. Once again, just wanting to leave after I'm done with him, I just oblige and go back. My coworker, who I'm going to call E, calls back and says that I shouldn't let him do that. I then called back saying that we've been letting him control us for months, and it's not my problem to handle a manager's problem if he has issues. My night manager hears this and sees it's the guy at the window. They then groan and they ask me what the issue is with him this time. I explained her the story and she went up to him and told him that it makes no difference what she does. He's getting his order fresh every single time by the people he wants to make his order, so to just suck it up and take the bag. She hands him the bag and then storms in the back to finish her inventory. The guy then pokes his arm and head in the window and tries to get one of the other coworkers to remake his order. Coworker and I both said that we're not going to do that since there was nothing even wrong with his food. Well, he doesn't like this, and he actually throws his bag of food inside the store and spills it all over the floor. He sees this and absolutely loses it. She runs over to the window that he's still in and then screams at him how he can't disrespect us like this, and that we for sure won't be remaking his order now, but we'll give him his money back. He then screams at her, and they actually go at it for a few minutes. I call up the night manager, and she runs up to also scream at him. As he gives the guy back his money, he actually grabs her arm and then yanks her almost through the window. Now, because of the pandemic, we have these plastic dividers at the top of where the customer would be speaking to. So if that wasn't there, she would have went straight through the window. Now everyone is screaming at this guy to get the hell out of there and that we're calling the cops as he just assaulted a minor. Earlier that week, E had racial slurs screamed at her by a bunch of rednecks because she was black. I felt really bad for her dealing with two big issues that happened in such a short period of time. She broke out of his grasp and ran to the back. The guy didn't even leave. In his crazy, twisted mind, he thought he was in the right here. He was running in circles outside of our walk-up area and was actually screaming to himself about E and how he's gonna set the cops on us. He tries banging on the windows to further get our attention, but we just ignored him. 4 cop cars drove in, blocking the entrance and the exit of the drive-thru so that no one can come in or leave. They talked to him, and the guy just isn't grasping that he attacked a minor and he's crazy. The owner of the company sends in the security footage of just what happened to the cops, and we set the guy on trespassing. The guy actually had to be escorted off the property because he wouldn't leave. He thankfully hasn't come in since that day, but we still see him riding around the road next to our place, and he gives us menacing looks every time he passes by, not once breaking eye contact. He really wasn't right in the head. The dead stares he would give us through the windows, the emotionless way he would speak to us, how picky he was with everything, and how quick he snapped and resorted to violence. It was insane. Very fortunately, he didn't get any injuries from the incident and was only shaken up, but she did quit a few weeks later, and I can't really blame her. I feel really bad for her. No one should ever have to deal with being assaulted by customers or having racial slurs spewed at them. She was way too young to have to deal with that.
Just a disclaimer, this isn't the type of story to have you on the edge of your seat. It is, however, one of the creepiest occurrences I've ever had, and this just goes to show you how the comfort of your own home can be dangerous. This happened about a year ago, back when I had graduated from college. I had just gotten a paid internship for my field of study as a computer technician. My duties were to basically assist companies with basic computer errors they may face. It was an easy and well-rewarding job for me, as I loved computers ever since I was a kid. At the time, inflation was through the roof, so I was extremely grateful for this job. The only part I didn't like about it were the hours. I had to get up at around 11 p.m. and work well into the night till around 3 a.m., so whenever I got home, I would always be tired. During this internship, I've been renting out this small one-bedroom home as a place to stay. I earned enough to pay for it, but my parents were proud of me for getting this job, which made them pay for half. One night, I had been at work during the middle of my shift when I get a call from my boss. He had told me that he was suspending operations until the next day due to a possible storm emergency. This resulted in me having to clock out and go home for the night. As you could imagine, I was drained from working and instantly fell asleep listening to the falling rain. I'd say I slept for a good 3 hours or so when I awoke to a noise from my room. It sounded similar to a knocking sound, but much more sudden and fast. I glanced over at the clock. It was 4:07 a.m. and was still pouring outside. Figuring it was likely hail hitting the roof, I disregarded it and tried my best to go back to sleep. However, not even a minute later, I hear the same noise again, this time much louder. I felt my blood run cold as I heard this and realized it was coming from my wall. I was almost certain there was an animal living in my walls, as I don't live too far from a wooded area. I slowly get up from my bed and put my sliders on and put my ear up against the wall. It was quiet for a good minute before the unexpected happened. A knock louder than ever hit the wall, where I stumbled back where I just so happened to look up at the air vent. A quick flash of lightning illuminated what appeared to be someone's eyes looking at me through the vent. What disturbed me the most was their face. It was pale, and this person didn't appear to have any eyebrows. That was the best description I could give, as they then ducked back down inside of the wall. I locked eye contact with this person for a good second before running out of the house to call the police. Thankfully, the cops in my city are the type that takes their job seriously, so they were able to get here quickly. One officer stayed with me while the other one inspected the wall and claimed that it was too narrow for anyone to fit through. After hearing this, I checked the wall myself and even went as far as to take it apart to realize that he was right. Needless to say, both officers went out of their way to shine their lights and actually look inside. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary or misplaced, so I thanked them for their time and they left. It was then where I called my parents, wanting to tell them about what I had seen. However, I must have caught them at a bad time, as they didn't want to hear it and claimed it was just night terrors. Now, I did have night terrors from my childhood that made its way into my adult years, but it was rare for me to have one. The next day, I went out to get drywall to replace the piece of wall I had taken out. I have never believed in the paranormal, but I have no other explanation for what I saw. Nothing has happened since, and I intend for it to remain that way. So, this happened the day before Halloween, and I'm still on the edge of my seat as I write this. For reference, I'm a female, currently 24, and live in a small town outside of Omaha, Nebraska. The town I lived in is known to be very safe with a population of about 5,000 people, meaning bad things don't happen here. It's a nice little community, and it even had its own park and signature restaurants and shops. I've lived in this town my whole life and never once had a reason to feel afraid. However, that would all change in just one night. It was the middle of the night, and I had just come home from a friend's party really tired. Wanting to go to bed, but also really hungry, I decided I'd figure out what I could eat. Now, one thing you have to know about me is that I could never sleep on an empty stomach. With little to no motivation to cook anything, I decided to order a few things from McDonald's via DoorDash. I hardly used it, but it was convenient for times like these when I didn't want to cook anything. Living in the middle of nowhere, I knew it would take a while for a dasher to deliver my food. To kill some time, I started on some homework and watched a few YouTube videos while waiting for my food. About 30 minutes go by and I get a notification from DoorDash letting me know that the dasher was approaching. Relieved, I go outside where I was greeted to a man in his car that had my food. He politely gives it to me and even makes sure it was the correct order and tells me to have a nice night. I thank him for the order and leave him an extra tip as a token of my respect. He then drives off and I go inside to finish my homework while I ate my dinner until it was time for bed. After about an hour or so of rolling around in my bed trying to get comfortable, I finally managed to fall asleep. Suddenly, the sound of heavy knocking at the front door abruptly woke me up. Thinking it was maybe my parents or possibly my older brother coming home, I put on my slippers and go out to the front to look. Standing on the other side of the door was the DoorDash delivery man staring at my Ring doorbell camera with this creepy smile. He was saying all these sorts of weird phrases while pacing back and forth around my patio. I ask him if he needed help, and he responds in this raspy voice saying that he wanted to thank me for the tip and wanted to come in to chat. I tell him that it was my pleasure, but that I couldn't let him in as I was sleeping. However, he disregarded my answer and started persuading me as to why I should let him in. At this point, he's clearly not taking no for an answer, and I told him to please leave my property before I called 911. His joyful, cheerful face then suddenly changed drastically into anger. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse, he starts to form this really creepy grin and begins to laugh out loud hysterically. On top of that, he also made various death threats towards me while basically pounding on my door. Now, I can't show you the whole video, but here's a picture of what he looked like taken from my Ring doorbell camera. That's what I saw, clear as day, standing right outside of my driveway. I tell him that I'm calling the police, and this is what made him finally back off and drive away. Needless to say, I reported the incident to DoorDash and called the sheriff just to be safe. From what I heard, DoorDash had removed him from doing deliveries and police were able to make an arrest. I'm still not sure if I'd be writing this had I opened the door.
When I was in grad school, I relocated from my home state to a new state 5 hours away to attend classes. The area around the university I was going to wasn't the safest, but I figured finding a nearby apartment was the easiest way to save on costs, so that I didn't incur a ton of debt pursuing my degree. The building I moved into was basically a converted 3-story house with a large 2-story extension behind it. I lived in one of the middle units on the first floor, and I had a parking space in the very back of the building. I mostly kept to myself, but I inevitably ended up meeting my next-door neighbors. They were a married couple with no kids, probably 10 or 12 years older than me. I found out through the building super that the husband was the son of the man who owned the entire property. The husband had been in a really bad automobile accident that left him with some lasting cognitive limitations. The wife seemed nice, but had a very dominating personality and talked a lot. They were both really enthusiastic to meet me and get to know me, which I initially chalked up to them being lonely. I would later start to suspect that they wanted some kind of relationship with me. It was that kind of weird vibe. They would frequently either sit outside their door or leave just their screen door closed so that they could see me and stop me while I walked to and from my car to my own apartment. These conversations would take anywhere from 5 minutes to half an hour before they'd get the hint that I was trying to go about my day. They would always end with an offer to have me over for dinner and a drink sometime, which I would always politely decline. Their friendly veneer towards me was even more unsettling, considering I would hear them getting into shouting matches most nights, sometimes all night long while I tried to sleep. For a whole year I dealt with this, right before my lease was up in January and I found a new place to live. I got really good at avoiding them, but when I was moving out, the husband finally caught me with boxes in my hand. He called after me.
"Hey, where are you going?"
I turned around to face him, but kept walking backwards, and then said, "Oh, hi. I'm actually moving out this week." His eyes got wide, and he just stared at me, then sang,
"But you never came over for dinner."
I didn't really know what to say to that, apart from, "Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't get the chance." He stood in the middle of the driveway and just continued to stare at me without saying anything. So I turned back around and loaded the box into my car. As I left the complex with that load of stuff, I drove past him and he just continued to stare at me with wide eyes and an expressionless face. About 2 days later, I had moved all of my extra things out and was just living in the unit with my essentials. That night, it was brutally cold, with temperatures dropping down in the negatives. When the sun went down, all the electric in my unit went off. I didn't have access to my electrical panel, and when I called the super, he didn't answer. I ended up having to call the electric company to report an outage and gathered up my stuff to stay at my then girlfriend's parents' house. I went back the next morning, determined to move the last of my stuff once and for all, when I saw the electric company's truck pulled over in the street in front of the building. I was entering my unit when the workman came up to me and asked if I was the one who reported the outage. I said I was, and he gave a little chuckle, then sang, "Well, buddy, you managed to piss somebody off." I asked him what he meant by that, and he said, "The only outage in the building was to your unit. Normally when a circuit is tripped, the switch flips to a halfway position to turn off. Your switch was flipped all the way off, so someone went down there and did that to you on purpose." I asked him where the switch was, and he said the basement storage unit, but that's only accessible by the super or the building owner. I pieced it all together and realized that my neighbor had turned off my power on the coldest night of the year. I didn't even bother confronting him about it. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I finished packing up my stuff and left, never looking back to see if he or his wife were watching me go.
I'm a female who's currently 30 years old, and this took place late last year in early November. My fiancé and I had just bought a boating company in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. At the time, we lived in LA, and because we had bought the company, we had to move to Florida to maintain it. Life was kind of what you'd expect for Florida. It rained a lot and was almost tropical during the summer months. If you've been to Florida or lived there, you'll probably relate to what I'm saying. Anyway, we had moved into a large one-storied home appropriate for a family of 4. We didn't have kids, but the house wasn't too expensive and we needed to find a new place. For the first month or so, the move had been well and we started to adapt to the new environment. In other words, things were going well for the most part. One day, my fiancé had gone into the office while I was homesick with the flu. At one point during the day, I remember going into the kitchen to get a snack to just have something in my stomach. Upon entering the kitchen full of unopened boxes, I for some reason get a weird feeling. It wasn't a bad feeling, but rather a feeling that made me alert or something. You know that feeling you get when you feel like someone's watching you? Yeah, I had that in spades. I hesitate before looking out the sliding glass door to see someone walking around my vegetable garden. By the looks of it, they looked like a younger adult in all black wearing a satchel. Now, this house had a gate on the side that only opened if you had the password. However, the password wasn't working, which indicated that he jumped the fence. The thing that really caught my eye was that he appeared to be pouring something around the garden. My initial instinct was to call my fiancé, but realized that he would get worried and try to take this into his own hands. Without any other options, I pick up the phone to call the police. The operator said they'd try to have someone there soon, but to just stay hidden in the meantime. This person continues to look around the garden as I run to my room and lock my door. All the while, I'm on my bed praying to God that he doesn't come inside or break in. Minutes felt like hours before hearing the police sirens from down the road. They got louder as they pulled into my house, where I then heard some sort of commotion going on. Upon going outside, I see 4 police officers restraining this kid who appeared to be an older teen. However, he didn't try to get away. He kinda just stood there, accepting his defeat. As I spoke with the police, I then learned a shocking truth I didn't expect to hear. While they were restraining him, they managed to find several traces of liquid mercury, which is what he was using to put in our garden. It was then where I called my fiancé, where he had to leave work to come home. Turns out, this teenager was actually our next-door neighbor's son. Both his parents were devastated, apologizing to us for his actions. While we understood their pain, we ended up filing charges against the son for attempted murder. How he got a container of mercury, we have no idea. I'm still very thankful I caught him in the act, as I'm not sure if I'd still be writing this had I eaten the vegetables. He was arrested and put in jail for 10 years according to his parents. Later that same day, his parents had told us that their son was innocent and that he was just looking at our garden. Me, nor my fiancé, wanted to hear it. My name is Alex, and this happened just yesterday late last night with my girlfriend. For a very brief 4 months or so, I worked as a delivery driver for a few food delivery apps at the time, mostly being active on Uber Eats and DoorDash, as those were the ones that tended to be more popular. I didn't expect to make big money from this side hustle, but it helped with other small things like groceries and utilities. I live in the suburbs of LA, which is a very crowded part of the city, so deliveries were usually quick and close. Anyway, this happened last night while my girlfriend and I were doing deliveries. We had just gotten home from a friend's party, and while most people would be exhausted, we were surprisingly still active. Not knowing what to do, my girlfriend and I decided we'd go out and do a few deliveries just to have some us time. Being in the car with a loved one always felt like a special sort of vibe. Anyway, almost immediately, someone requested a large order from a local Wingstop, and I was the one who accepted it. Big orders usually meant that the customer would have to tip more, aka more money for me. We drive to the location, and I tell my girlfriend to wait in the car while I go get the food. Now, Wingstop usually takes a bit of time before the order is ready, which meant I had to wait a few minutes. Once the food had been done, I grab it and start heading back to the car when I see my girlfriend is stoned as a statue. She's sitting in the front seat with her eyes wild and had a look of fear. At first, I was confused as to why she was like that and motioned for her to roll down the window while asking her what the hell happened. She slowly flicks the button and tells me in a shook voice to get in the car. I do just that, and we drove over to the destination while I continued to ask what was wrong. After what felt like forever, she finally tells me everything, and what she told me made my stomach drop. As I was inside the restaurant waiting for the food, my girlfriend had been on her phone texting a friend when she looks out the window. Practically hovering over the window was a very large and tall man who looked to be at least 6'7". He wore all black and was staring at my girlfriend with this very angry look, and in his hand was a window smasher. His face was red and his eyes were menacing, as if he had this strong hatred towards my girlfriend. However, she couldn't move or say anything. She simply turned to face the front and hoped that he'd just leave. After about a decent minute, he thankfully did, and that was when I had come out of the restaurant. Now, there's no real way to say this without trying to brag, but my girlfriend is very pretty. Like, she's cute, and her looks would oftentimes attract a lot of faces. My theory was that the man who had come up to the car had seen her and knew she was with me, as he had probably been watching us. We didn't really bother calling the police, as there wasn't really something to be done about it. After that, we had called it a night and went straight home, as she couldn't shake off the paranoia. Up until now, I'm still not exactly sure as to what the man wanted or what his intentions were, but if he had a device to break windows, they couldn't have been good. From now on, my girlfriend and I have agreed that whenever we do orders together, that we'd both be the ones to go inside.
For some background of this story, I'm a female, and I worked at Target for a while, over a year ago. The Target that I worked at was very close to my apartment at the time, and it was a pretty enjoyable job for me. My favorite part was talking with coworkers and becoming friends with them. Mostly what I would do is work in the clothing department. I would do all sorts of things there, and it wasn't very stressful because things usually don't get busy like they do in the grocery section. At the time of this story, I had been working there for almost 4 months. I remember it very well. It all started on a typical day at work. I was in the clothing department, particularly the women's section, straightening up items that were out of place. It was during the daytime, and the store was calm. This is when a tall man approached me. Assuming he was a customer who had a question about something, I greeted him, asking how I could help. The man stood there, looking directly at me with a somewhat creepy grin on his face for a moment. He then said, "Yes, you can help me, by going out with me tonight." I laughed it off. I had no interest in going out with the man, but I wasn't scared of him or anything. I just told him that I had a boyfriend, even though I didn't actually have one. This was always the best way to tell off a guy that I wasn't interested in my experience. The man replied rather quickly, saying, "No, you don't." I I told him that I did, and I asked the man if he needed help finding anything. He then responded with an even creepier reply. Yes, directions to your house. I laughed off this remark as well. I was just hoping that the man was joking around, because this was getting really weird. After he said that, I told him that I had a lot of work to do, and I told him to have a good day. Then I started making my way to another section of the large clothing department that we had. The clothing area was practically big enough to get lost in. I was hoping to lose sight of the man, but when I started moving away, he followed. When I had made it to another section and he was still next to me, I stopped. I didn't have a problem with confrontation, and I said to the man, "Why are you following me? You're kind of creeping me out." The guy put his hands up as if to say, "My bad." He then walked away, and it was a huge relief. I had dealt with customers asking me out or trying to flirt with me a couple of times. It didn't happen very often, but here and there it did. None of them had been nearly as bad as this, though. I kept working for several hours. By then, I had forgotten about my experience earlier, but I soon remembered when I spotted the same man. I couldn't believe it at first. This was now about 3 hours after our first interaction. To me, it was still mind-blowing that he was still in the store. Maybe he had left and then come back. Either way, it was strange, and it was now a bigger concern for me, because shortly after I had spotted him, I saw him look over at me and then look quickly away. The man was sort of far away too. It looked like he was almost hiding from me. He stood, mostly covered by a rack of clothing, staring in my direction. I moved slightly and kept working, to which the man moved slightly as well to keep looking at me. I stopped and sighed. This was really annoying now. I walked away, leaving what I was doing. I moved to a whole nother section of the store, far away from that one. There, I didn't really have any work to do, but I just wanted to get that man off of me. I was now in the grocery area, and I was there for about a minute before spotting the man again. He was walking into the area, and he saw me for a split second, and then disappeared into a nearby aisle. At this point, I decided to take my break. I had one that I could take at any time, and I was planning to after I had finished the work that I was doing in the clothing department. But seeing as this creep was back and still following me around, I decided to just take my break now. I radioed in on my walkie-talkie to let my supervisor know I would be taking my break. Then I headed towards the front end of the store. Our break room was through doors at the front, and I walked in there. When I got inside the break room, I thought back to the crazy situation. Did that man seriously think he was being slick? I mean, I spotted him twice, and it was like he thought I couldn't see him. I just hoped that he would notice I was not there anymore and then leave. I'm not going to lie, I took a little bit extra time on my break. I was pretty concerned to return back out and see the man again. If I did see him, I was going to have to tell a coworker or our security team. I didn't want to have to do that, but I would if it was necessary. When I went back out though, I didn't notice the man anywhere. I went back to work in the clothing department, but was much more alert and constantly looking around. I didn't see the guy for the rest of my shift that night, which was about 2 more hours. I was really happy about this. But still, I thought possibly he was still there looking at me somewhere and had just gotten better about hiding. At the end of the day though, I don't think he was. I left work and went home, not seeing the guy at all. Soon, I forgot all about him. I worked several more times that week, mostly my usual shifts. One night, the very next week, I found myself working on a quiet evening. I was almost done, and it was past the busy amount of customers that we would usually get between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. I was doing my usual work of organizing a section of the clothing department. That's when I got a call on my walkie. Somebody radioed asking for me, and I radioed back telling them to go ahead. I wasn't quite sure who had said it, but that wasn't uncommon. A big store like Target has so many employees. Plus, there are always new people. A handful of my coworkers, I could instantly recognize their voices over the walkie-talkie, but many of them I could not. After telling them to go ahead, they asked me to go to Channel 3. This is how we would communicate without other employees hearing us. It was used for more descriptive details or directions on what we were supposed to do. After turning to 3, I told them to go ahead again. That's when I was told that I was needed in receiving and to help with something quick. I told them that I was on my way and began walking over. Receiving was the back room of the store basically. I wouldn't work back there a lot, but I had helped with things there several times in the past. It took me a few minutes to walk all the way back there, and when I had made it, I exited the store into the back. Things were very quiet back there. I had expected to see someone there waiting for me. I turned my walkie to Channel 3 again and said that I was in receiving. Nobody said anything. but I heard my voice echo onto somebody else's walkie nearby. I then called out, asking where they were, but I didn't get a response. I walked closer to the voice, which was near one of the doors leading to outside. I noticed that it was open, and I could see outside into the night. That's when I saw the man again. He stepped out from behind a shelf back there. I couldn't believe he was here. "That was you on the walkie, wasn't it?" I said to him. The man just started walking towards me. I backed away as he got closer. I looked at how much taller he was than me. If he tried to grab me, it would be difficult to get away. He got closer, and I turned around, but as soon as I did, he grabbed my arm. Then, he started to pull me backwards. I started yelling, but back there, it wasn't likely anybody would hear me. Suddenly, I heard the doors leading back to the shopping area open. I then saw one of my coworkers, Amy, walking over. I yelled at her, and she asked what was going on. The man let me go and then sprinted out the doors outside. I ran over to Amy and explained to her what had happened. Amy told me that she had heard the person asking me to go to Channel 3. She said that when she didn't recognize the voice and was just being nosy in general, she turned to Channel 3 as well. She was wondering what I was being asked to do. When she heard I was supposed to go to receiving, she found it strange, because she had just been there earlier in the night and wasn't aware of anything that would be done back there. She decided to see for herself, and I'm really glad that she did. We had to call the police and report the incident, but unfortunately, not much could be done. The man had bought a walkie-talkie and got on the same frequency as us, which was not hard to do at all. Many standard walkie-talkies were capable of it. I'm just glad I was all right. I worked at Target for a few months after that, and luckily, never saw the man again.
Over 4 years ago, I worked at a warehouse in the small town that I'm from. I decided to leave after my health started to get worse physically, and I was diagnosed with panic disorder and severe anxiety after the situation I'm about to tell you about. This changed the way I developed friendships after this job, that's for certain. So I started this job on April Fool's Day, 2018, and I had no high expectations of the job. All I wanted was to do my job, get paid, and go home, as I have 2 children at home. The job wasn't hard, and it made pretty good money for all the duties considered, so I really couldn't complain. I worked second shift for about 5 months, then I went to the day shift. While working the second shift, I kept to myself mostly until, one day, I met someone after we struck up a conversation about gaming. We'll name him Jeff. Well, Jeff was a pretty good guy, and we had a lot of things in common. I went home that night, and he popped up in my suggested friends on Facebook, which was odd, but I decided to add him. When I did, we started talking more at work, until he suggested that we should hang out, so we hung out pretty frequently. We were friends for a month at this point, and one day, he decided that he was going to introduce me to his partner. She seemed decent at first, super nice, didn't seem to be the judgmental type, so I was cool with her. From then on, I would hang out with him when my kids were spending time with their mother. One time, we were talking at a restaurant and he started to vent to me. Dude, she's such a bitch sometimes. The other day, I forgot to take out the trash and she threatened to stab me if I didn't. I've never been in a relationship where someone's threatened me, but she's got good intentions, dude. When he said that to me, I was concerned, but, of course, we'd only been friends for a month, so I thought maybe he was being morbidly jokingly, so I chuckled at him. He gave me a pretty serious look and said, "I'm not joking, she really did." That concerned me. Fast forward about 8 months, they're still together and we hung out pretty regularly. One day, we were all talking, and he seemed a little off that day, so I asked him what was wrong in front of her. He flashed a smirk and said, "Nothing, dude. I'm just a little tired." He didn't have his eyes on me, though. He had them on her when I asked that. When we went to work the next day, I asked him again, "Do you promise it's just between us?" Of course, I agreed. He said that he was breaking up with her, and she went a little crazy. He said that she grabbed her gun and pointed it at him and said, "If I can't have you, no one will." He said he diffused the situation and is trying to look for a way out. Not really knowing what to say, I just said, "You'll figure it out, man. If you need somewhere to go, You can come stay with me until you get her out of your house. Fast forward into the next year. He finally decided to leave her. When he did, she flipped out again. This time, he told her over text. She said that she was going to find him and kill him, and he was actually out of work that day with a vacation day. He sent me a text and said, "Hey, let me know if she comes over to work looking for me." This struck me as odd because I had no idea about the situation that was unfolding. She actually did come over to our job, and she asked me where he was. I said, "I have no idea. I thought he was with you, and you guys went out of town or something." All she did was roll up her window and drive off. I called him and told her that she came by, and he called the police about it. They found her up the road with a loaded gun in her car. 2 months later, he decided to talk to her again. He asked if I had seen her around, and I hadn't. He said, "I'd take some vacation days if I were you." Dumbfounded, I asked him why. "Because she's out of jail, and her cousins are in town trying to find people she has personal vendettas with. You're one of them." At that point, I was terrified. I grabbed my kids and went out of town, took 2 weeks off of work. Came to find the next day, her and her cousins went to the next town over and shot and killed 3 people in an apartment. The reason why he knew that they were coming after me is because they made a Facebook Messenger group that he was included in and set a list of names. Everyone regarded it as spam and decided to disregard the message, but he knew what it was. 3 of the names on the list were the people they shot. The 4th name on the list was mine. After they found evidence, he decided to go public about the group and the screenshots that he had. They were all charged with first-degree murder. From then on, I was very careful about who I stuck my neck out for, because even though he knew the context of the list and her intentions, he decided not to inform anyone else. Needless to say, we aren't friends anymore, and I dodged a bullet, literally. This happened a few years back, but it was so wild that I tell everyone about it when I'm talking about weird encounters. I worked at Woodfield Mall in the department store. I usually got out by 9 p.m., but this day had ended up there closer to 10 p.m. As I was balancing out my register, I had this intense feeling of dread, like my stomach dropped, and I just had a terrible feeling about leaving the building. If you don't know, Woodfield Mall is one of the biggest malls in America, and it's very busy all the time. I made my way to the employee break room, where the stairwell that led to the second-level parking was. That same feeling of dread came over me again. I decided to call my friend and keep him on the phone until I made it to my car. When he answered, I literally said, "I know I'm being stupid, but I'm just nervous to walk into my car alone." As I open the door to the parking garage, all I see is a giant parking lot, nearly empty. My car, an extra-large SUV, and about 4 spots away from my car are 2 cars, surrounded by a group of 10 very seedy-looking people. I immediately tell my friend what I see, and he was like, "Just keep talking to me and walk as fast as you can to your car," which had my heart racing because I had to walk right past them to get to my car. I hurriedly walked by and jumped into my car. I let my friend know I was good and panicked for nothing. We disconnected, and then I hear a tap 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 on my window. My heart sank as I turned to see who was tapping on my window. Of course, it was one of those creeps. I rolled my window down a fourth of the way. I'm in a huge SUV, and he was somewhat short, so he couldn't reach in through the window. He asked me if I had a lighter. He must have seen me light up a cigarette as soon as I got in my car. I told him my lighter's on its last leg and might not light, but I hand it to him. He begins to try to spark it, while stopping to ask me all sorts of weird questions. He kept asking me if I wanted to go for a walk. Around an empty mall parking lot? No thanks. I declined multiple times. At that point, I'm just feeling annoyed until I see him pull his own lighter and light his cigarette. Now my head was spinning. Maybe he just used the lighter excuse to talk to me, or maybe it was something worse. some things become a little blurry conversation-wise because the fear took over, but I remember seeing his friends gathering in front of my car, which made me extremely nervous. I tell the guy to watch out because I'm going to flick my cigarette out the window, so he backs up, and I flick it towards his friends hoping they might scatter. One guy got mad and started getting loud, so I just apologized and said it was an accident. He walked off with a pissy attitude and his friends followed. Thank God. I tell the guy by the window that I have to go, as my gas light goes on and makes a ping sound. The guy hears it and pops up right next to my window and says, "Looks like you're gonna run out of gas, Miss Lady. Hope you don't break down on the side of the road," followed by a small mischievous smile, and then says, "Maybe I'll see you around." At that point, I don't care if I run his feet over, and I just floored it out of there and could hear them all laughing. I don't know what the fuck that was all about, but it was absolutely terrifying, and I spent the entire time looking over my shoulder at the gas station and on my drive home. Stay aware, friends, and always trust your gut.
I used to work at a Dollar Tree. Dollar Tree is a popular dollar store, and I worked there for about 6 months several years ago. I worked as a cashier, and after being there for only a few months, I would occasionally work by myself. We were always trying to hire more people, but luckily, every time I would be the only one working, it was never that bad. I worked mostly night shifts, usually until close. We closed at 10 p.m., and the store was in a sort of quiet area. One quiet night, I was working by myself. It was slightly rainy outside, and it would sprinkle on and off. I was noticing this because in the front of the store, ahead of the check lanes, there were windows looking out into the parking lot. After 8 p.m. that night, we hardly got any customers. The rain must have kept people in. I kept myself busy by doing small tasks, organizing things, and going on my phone. The last hour would always drag out, but it was also nice to know that I would be going home soon. And on this night, after 9 p.m., we didn't have a single customer. This was fine with me. I always felt a little bit nervous being the lone employee on the clock when somebody came in late at night. But at about 9:15 or so, I saw a car pull into the wet parking lot. Up to that point, my car had been the only one there. This car that pulled in was older and it was dark blue. It was a 4-door sedan, and it parked in the closest parking space, and then I saw a man get out. He was a little bit of a bigger guy, and he wore a blue raincoat and a gray and red baseball cap. He left his car and approached the store. After going inside, he walked down one of the aisles. I stayed by the register at my check lane and went on my phone. A few minutes later, I observed the man walking through the aisles towards the front of the store. He seemed to be just kind of casually looking around. He didn't have any items in hand, and he soon walked back out of my sight. Then he slowly walked towards the front. I looked over and made eye contact with the man for a brief moment. To be friendly, I smiled a little and said hi. The man just looked away and then slowly walked for the exit. Then he left the store. I watched the man get back inside of his car and then drive away. I was back to being by myself again. By now, it was about 9:30. I walked around the store and made sure that everything was in order. Then I decided to clean the floors now so I could leave right at 10. Luckily for me, nobody came to shop as I did so. This took me until about 9:50. Then I went back to my check lane and went on my phone for the remaining 10 minutes. I was checking the time on my phone every minute so that I could close right at 10 and then clock out. At 9:58 p.m., I saw a car pulling into the parking lot. I had a bad feeling. But then I noticed something. It was the same car that had just been here. There was no mistaking it because this was an older looking car and kind of unusual. The man who had just been here about 30 minutes ago was back, but he did not park close to the store this time. Now he went and parked right next to my vehicle. I had parked somewhat far away and up against a curb. The man parked on the side of the car closer to me, so my car was mostly obstructed from my vision by his car. I thought this was a little bit strange. I figured maybe the man had dropped something on the ground when he was in the store and he came back to get it. I'm not sure why, but that's the possible explanation that went through my head. The man did not get out of his car though. I had expected him to. Instead, he stayed inside of his car with the engine running. At 10 p.m., his engine turned off. It was now time for me to lock the doors, and I walked over to them, all the while keeping my eyes on the car in the parking lot. I wondered if he would get out when I approached the doors or something like that. I was a little worried for some reason, but he didn't. I made it to the front doors and successfully locked them. Then I walked to the back area to clock out of my shift. After doing so, I returned to the front, hoping and sort of expecting to see that the man was now gone. After all, he could clearly see that we were now closed, and I had just locked up. But the car was still there. It appeared as though the man was still inside of it. Now, I had a really bad feeling. Why did he choose to park right next to me? There were a dozen closer spaces, and why was he even here at all? I thought about just walking out, going to my car, and leaving, but my instincts just told me not to. What if the man was waiting for me? I decided to wait inside and hope that the man would leave. I sat inside at my check lane, going on my phone and looking up every minute or so to see if the guy was gone yet. But he wasn't leaving, and soon 30 minutes had passed. It was now 10:30 at night, and the man was still parked right next to my car in his. I decided that I would text my best friend Brenna, who happened to live pretty close by. After telling her of the situation, she offered to come and pick me up in her car, and I agreed. I told her to drive right up to the front doors. My car and the man were much further away in the backside of the parking lot. She told me that she was leaving, and about 5 minutes later, I saw her car enter the parking lot. I walked over to the front of the store and then walked out. Right as she pulled up, she stopped briefly, let me in the passenger seat, then she quickly drove away. We left, and thankfully the man did not follow us in his car. We drove back to Brenna's house, and then returned to the Dollar Tree a short time later. The man's car was now gone. Brenna dropped me off, and I was able to get inside my vehicle okay, and then drive home. After that experience, I really wondered what the man was doing. Was he waiting for me to get to my car, and did he have something planned? I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I used to shop at Target all the time, but recently I don't want to go back there. At least, not to the location that I live by. Some creepy and weird things happened to me there. There's really only one Target that's close to where I live. It's been my main store for years to get just about anything. There's some other stores that I go to as well, but Target has the best variety. I've always preferred it over Walmart as well. One night, I went shopping after work. I was getting a lot of items, mainly groceries. I got a cart and began shopping around the store. It wasn't all that busy, and that made things go smoothly. After shopping for probably about 30 minutes, I was almost done. My cart had lots of items in it, and I was in the last area of the store that I would be going to, which was the cold section. The refrigerated items and the freezer items is what I would always get last. That way, they wouldn't melt by the time I got home. When I got to that section of the store, it was empty. I was the only person there. They had a freezer at the back of the store, and I was getting something from it when I saw something strange. It was like movement of some sort behind the items. This particular freezer section was up against the very back of the store leading to the back room. That's when I realized that a person was back there, behind the freezer shelves. I could see between the levels of shelves that they had, but not by much. Somebody was right behind the spot that I was at. At first, I thought it was kind of funny, but I soon realized it wasn't a Target employee. I moved down to get something else, and whoever was there seemed to move down with me. As I was examining a product, I could see that the person was wearing black, not the typical red shirt and khakis that a Target employee would wear. Then, they got closer, and I noticed that I could now see their head through the gap between the shelves. The person was wearing a black ski mask. My only thought was that this was really strange. I moved even further down, and the masked man moved down with me. He was beginning to really freak me out. He kept staring at me from the other side. Luckily for me, I only needed one more item from that aisle. I went to grab it, as the masked man stared at me. Then, as I was reaching for the product, the guy reached over and shoved the whole box of them at me. Multiple items fell onto the floor. I put them back as he disappeared into the freezer. This guy was causing problems, and I decided to tell an employee about him. I walked down a few aisles before finding somebody who worked there. I told them about the guy and how he was inside of the freezer. The employee told me that she would tell the person to leave and that they couldn't be back there. There happened to be doors leading to the back room of the store right nearby, and I watched her walk through them. About a minute later, the employee emerged again. She told me that she couldn't find anybody back there at all. Whoever had been doing that must have left. I hadn't seen anybody else come out of the doors, though. I shrugged it off and was done with my shopping, so I decided to head out. I walked up to the front and paid for everything, then left the store. About a week later, I returned. I would say that I went grocery shopping roughly once a week. I didn't have a specific day or anything like that I would go, but on average it was probably about once. This time that I went back to the Target was just like any other. I did all of my shopping in about 30 minutes or so, and then checked out with all of my items. After I left the store, I walked out to my car and unloaded the groceries into it. Then I started driving home. This particular Target has several other businesses around it, like just past the parking lot. There was also a few trees and bushes around for scenery. As I was driving away, leaving the parking lot, I was driving between some other businesses and the Target parking lot going to a connecting road. That's when I saw the same guy dressed in all black and a ski mask. He was halfway hiding behind a bush, and he popped out and looked directly at me as I drove away. I drove right past him in disbelief. This was the same guy who I had seen last time I had been at this same Target. But this time he was outside, not inside the store. It was crazy to me how I specifically saw him. Maybe he just liked to go to Target and mess with people. I really didn't know. But what I did know is that I was really weirded out by this. The way he was hiding in the bushes was concerning. Luckily, I was away from him now and on the way home. After that experience, I didn't go to Target for almost 2 weeks. When I returned, it was just another routine shopping trip, just like any other. I did my shopping like always and then left the store. It was nighttime again, and things were pretty quiet inside and outside of the Target. I had parked sort of in the middle of the parking lot, about halfway back. There were a few other cars around mine. When I got back to my car, I unloaded the groceries again and got inside. I started my engine and was just about ready to drive away. I happened to glance over at the car that was parked directly next to me to the left for no particular reason. When I glanced over though, I noticed movement. It caught my attention and my eyes stayed focused on it. The entire car had looked empty to me. The car was a standard looking white sedan and the back windows were tinted dark, but the front windows I could see through. That's when somebody emerged from the back seat, crawling over into the front passenger seat. It was a guy wearing all black and a ski mask. My jaw dropped when I saw this. He looked right at me through the windows separating us. He continued to stare at me for probably 5 seconds or so as I sat there in total shock. Then, his door started to open. I was so surprised, still from just seeing the guy, that I didn't do anything. It was like I couldn't move. After he opened the door, he stood up and reached for my driver's door. I finally came to my senses and hit the lock switch. Just moments later, the man with the mask tried opening my driver's door, which had just locked. He then leaned in very closely to my driver's window, basically pressing his face against it. I was beyond creeped out. He stared right at me, as close as he possibly could. I yelled at him to go away, but he didn't move. I put my car into reverse and then started backing out. The guy grabbed onto my car as I backed away. He was trying to stay with me, and when I had backed out and began driving, he finally let go. I saw him then run back to the car that he had been inside. I hit the gas harder to leave as soon as possible. Then I was able to make it out of the parking lot, and I quickly turned off to a busier street. After that, I quickly turned into another parking lot and then turned my lights off and parked. I watched, and several seconds later, I saw a car come out of the Target parking lot and drive quickly down the street past me. I was pretty sure that that was the guy. After the car was long gone, I was able to drive home, and I made it back okay. This wasn't all that long ago. Each of the last 3 times I went to that Target, I've seen the same man. Why is he there, and what is he doing? I really don't know. I haven't been back to that Target since.
When I was about 15, my family and I moved into a new house that was built in the past few years. It was a gorgeous 2-story home with 3 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and even a basement. Now, basements weren't anything too special, as they're commonly used, but it was rare to find one in a home in our state. Anyways, my parents worked in the upper medical industry, meaning they'd be out working for the most part, while I am mostly staying at home. Mind you, this was during the peak of the pandemic, so my parents would be workaholics helping patients left and right. The risk of me or a loved one catching the virus was high, and you could imagine the fear we were dealing with. I won't bore you with unnecessary details, so I'll just jump straight into it. This took place around the summertime in late July. My parents were at work as always, and I had stayed home playing video games with a few friends online. We were the type to always mess around and have a good time while playing together. And being 15 while home alone made you want to do whatever you wanted. Anyways, so we're playing for about a good hour or so, when I hear the phone ring. This is weird, as we almost never get any calls, and when we did, they were mainly for my dad. I was told by my dad to never answer the phone due to the possibility of scammers, which made sense at the end of the day. Therefore, I let it ring while I kept playing until it went to voicemail. However, not even a minute later, it for some reason rang again, to the point where my friends online told me to just pick it up. I could only assume that it had to be an emergency of some type where I had to answer it. I walked over to it and picked it up, where I began to hear breathing of a man. I began to repeatedly say hello into the phone, only to get no response other than the constant breathing. Eventually, I hung up the phone and went back to my game, where it rang again. This time, in a much more annoyed tone, I picked up and asked what the person wanted. It was then when the person from the other end said something along the lines of,
"I'm just waiting for you to come downstairs, Danny."
I felt my whole world shrivel up and die as I heard this, and knew the voice was too deep to be any one of my friends or anyone I knew. A few hours later, my parents came home when I told them about the phone call. My dad, being the tough guy he was, searched the house and found our secondary house phone on the floor and the kitchen window smashed open. I remember my dad calling the cops to investigate, but up until now, there have been no leads in finding out who was in our house that night. While there have been no progress, police were able to track where the call came from. The call came from California. I lived in Indiana, and we didn't know anyone from there. Update, September 14th, 2022. My dad had gotten a call from the police department with an update from the person who had broken into our house. Apparently, this person was actually homeless, who was caught breaking into another family's house while their daughter was home alone showering. The parents were out on their anniversary with no acknowledgement of what was happening. Turns out, the man had entered the home through an open window, where he went upstairs to find the girl. I won't explain what happened after that, but it wasn't good, to say the least. This person is truly messed up in the head, and had been doing this for months, as he is known to mess with his victims, mainly targeting children or anyone he thought was a good target. I'm happy to say that he was arrested and thrown in jail. As of now, that's all the information my family got.
This is something I've never really told anyone about, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately, so here it is. A few years back, 2015 or 2016, when I was 18 or 19, I used to work at a little cafe inside a car parts factory. It was basically a full-out but compact restaurant kitchen and lunchroom for the workers to eat there. Well, this one day, I get a call from my best friend, coworker. She's all kinds of upset because of this new creepy temp worker that made her feel severely uncomfortable by asking her a bunch of personal questions, like what she drove, where she lived, if she was single, had any kids, when she got off work, etc. She didn't want to walk out to her car alone. Mind you, she was my age too, 18 or 19, and this dude was in his mid to late 30s, if not already in his 40s. And we're in Flint, Michigan, so we weren't about to take our chances. I drove up to the parking lot, found her car, parked next to it, and she has a security guard escort her out. We didn't see the guy then, but she described him to me and the security guard, and that was that for a few days. Someone found him and told him to stay away from her, and he did. But then he met me. I knew exactly who he was as he stepped up to the register to place his lunch order, just from the description I had been given and by the creepy vibes he was giving off. He pulled the same intense Q&A on me that he had done to my friend too. But instead of telling him to fuck off or calling security or anything like that, I just told him a bunch of straight up lies. I told him I drove a blue 2012 Honda Civic, which I knew for a fact was one of the second shift manager's vehicle, who always parked near the front of the building. I also told him that my shift ended at 9:30, which was really the time that I usually slipped out for a cigarette break. So when 9:30 hit later that night, I walked out to smoke a cigarette and saw exactly what I was expecting to see. That stupid creep in the parking lot, close to the area that the Honda Civic was parked. He was just pacing back and forth between two vehicles that was parked a few spaces down in the same row, playing on his phone the entire time. At one point, he glanced up and saw me staring at him, but I had my big leather winter coat on and a hat, so I don't know if he recognized me at first from the distance or not. I finished my smoke and went back inside and explained the entire situation to the security guards, one of which was the original guard that had escorted my friend out to her car a couple days before, and they were dying laughing at the fact that I pulled one over on this prick and had actually caught him being shady. I'm not sure exactly what they did about it, but I do know they immediately went out to confront him in the parking lot, and that the guy was fired the same week. To this day, I still don't know what his intentions were, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out that it couldn't have been anything good. So ultimately, the moral of the story is, always have your friends back and trust your instincts, because if you don't, you could end up cornered in a parking lot and possibly attacked or abducted by a creepy guy who asked you too many questions. Edit, since I didn't include this originally. After my friend and I were informed that this guy was fired, we were told his full name, and my friend paid to do a background check on him. It came back with a violent criminal history of domestic abuse, assault, and battery with a weapon, jail time served for violating a PPO and parole, and some other things.